Hello everybody, welcome back to Memory Gamma. Today, as you can see from our TTS position, we are going to start with continue with my rankings, and we're going to move on to the Klingons. Now, several things maybe you may notice instantly. The first thing is that the Klingons have far fewer generic ships than the Federation. Very much true. Like the Federation, a lot of these are actually duplicates of the same ship that have slightly different upgrade bars. They are all in here and graded in respect like they were with the Federation. Apart from that, I said they're all much smaller. Now, as I did last time, this is going to be done by looking at their combined sort of stats, firing arc, points cost, upgrade bar, maneuver dial, all that sort of stuff. This is not indicative of my personal favourites. There are several ships that I would put in very different places if this was just being done of my favourite Klingon ship. However, this is being done of looking at it objectively. What gets used a lot? Why does it get used? What's, the most powerful? What's got the most versatility? What's the cheapest? What's the most effective? What's got the best action bar? And I'm going to give a quick talk about each one as we go through. So, without further ado, let me very quickly just put up a star map so it looks a little bit better than just the background. And we're going to start with number 13. And I'm going to again come in, we're going to zoom in and have a good look. So, the first one is the Raptor class. Now this is the NX era Klingon ship. It's not a bad ship by any means, and it is one of my personal favourites. 3 attack, 1 defence, 3 hull, 1 shield. Not amazing, also only gets a tech and a weapon upgrade, but it gets a tech upgrade slot, and it's a tiny ship with a tech upgrade slot. That's not a bad thing. I mean, for Klingon tech upgrades, there's a couple of good ones, and sometimes, this with a protective stasis field is relatively cheap and effective. Now, obviously, no crew upgrade slots means you're going to struggle with upgrades like that. However, a note for the Raptor is it is the only Klingon ship to have scan native on its action bar. So it is definitely something to consider in certain situations. If you're doing a particular mission where scanning is something that you want to be doing due to mission effects or anything like that, or even just you can bring along a weapon that doesn't require a target lock to fire, and you can just do action scan and be an offensive little gunboat. Nothing wrong with that, but as I said, it's one of the least customizable. The action bar said no battle stations, it can't cloak or sensor echo, it's much too early for the Klingons to have that. Only 1 shield and 1 defense dice. Now, the 1 defense dice is a standard across all Klingon ships, because Klingon ships very much rely on cloak to survive into combat, and then fundamentally, trust the enemy's destroyed after their first attack. They're not built for longevity in most cases. The Federation have got loads of defensive abilities and repair stuff. The Romulans have loads of ways to remain cloaked. Klingons are that middle ground. They haven't got an awful lot of ways to remain cloaked for a huge amount of time. There's a few of them, and there's been more in the recent years. And also they have very few effective and repeatable repair upgrades. They tend to be steam in, big boom, if the enemy's gone, congratulations. If they haven't, run away, recloak and come back. So hit and run attacks are the best for the Klingons, and the Raptor just doesn't quite work for that. 12, sticking with the older ships, we have the D7. Now, I loathe to put the D7 here. I am really sad. It's the same stat line, same maneuver dial, except it gets the 2 banks as green, so it's slightly more maneuverable, which is why it's 1 step higher. It also gets a crew slot and battle stations on the action bar. Now, again, problems with this is it's only got 3 hull, 1 shield. There's only a 90 forward arc, same as the Raptor. So firing arcs are limited, attack dice are limited, but they both get weapon slots. So that can be counteracted with a weapon card. Maneuvers are not bad. Not bad at all. Come about as a red, 6 green for the D7. It's not a bad ship, and I have seen people use generic D7s as swarm ships. They work quite nicely, especially the 11-point mark. Although, there are better things to do if you want to go swarm builds, and you know, they're still not massively tough. And also, if you're running a D7, there are named D7s, you know, the Clothos and the Divisor, which are just much better to run if you want to run D7s. Our next ship is going to be controversial, the Vocha. And people might say, okay, so why is a ship with 5 attack dice at 11th place? Basically, the Vocha, it suffers with a thing that a couple of other ships suffer with. It's high attack, it's high power, limited options. So one crew, one weapon, one tech. So even upgrades, but very few. Most Klingon ships get one of each upgrade. Some of them get less, like the D7 and the Raptor. Some of them occasionally have 2 of one of another, and they lack the 3rd slot, which is usually the tech slot. So you can't build up Klingon ships to be huge without a lot of work and bonus slots. Dominion Retrofit does help the Vocha. It gives it battle stations on the action bar. That makes a very, very nice upgrade and a very, very nice addition. However, it's 5 attack, 5 hull, 2 shields, only 1 defense dice. 5 when cloaked, yes, it's coming in, but it's just not. It's not. When I go to build, right, here's a Klingon fleet, Vochas come way down. Personally, I tend to look at D7s before Vochas, because I can get a pair of D7s for a single Vocha, and sometimes that more ships can be better. Again, this is going to cause contention, and I'm fully aware of that, and I fully welcome everyone's comments about where you think these ships should go. I know there are several players in the Fremont Reformation who are quite avid Klingon players. Shout out to the House of Maltz. Yeah, I know there are people that are going to disagree with me on this, but that's what it's here for. This is meant to spark discussion, and you go, why do you think these belong higher? But that's where it goes for me on my sort of analysis. Now the next one is the Negvar, because fundamentally it's identical to the Vocha, except it gets an additional point of hull. Now you might say it gets, you know, the Vocha's more manoeuvrable, so the Negvar is, you know, that. However, more durability. For the Klingon sort of ethos of steam in, massive alpha strike, the more durability you've got to be able to survive the person shooting back on that first turn of combat is more vital. And especially since you're going to be cloaked more often than not, more points of hull is even better. You want to make this even better? There's the Alliance upgrade that gives you 2 more points of hull, making this an 8 hull ship. That can be scary, because that means that it's going to be almost impossible to one-hit this even when it is cloaked. But this is where it goes. Also, only 1 crew, 1 weapon, 1 tech for the capital ship. So, again, not the best, but it is definitely useful. Now, the next ship is going to look like the identical. It's exactly the same, however, there is another version of the Negvar which comes with 2 crew slots in the generic. It came with the Blood Oath faction pack as the generic from the IKS Dove Wool. However, that card was not loading for me inside Utopia, so I just have another Negvar. But this Negvar will have 2 crew slots, which is why it's 1 place better than the original, because exactly the same ship but with more upgrade slots for the same points. There's nothing wrong with that. In the same way as in the Federation, I had the Akira with 3 weapon slots, 1 above the Akira with 2 weapon slots. Exactly the same ship, same points, but more slots. More slots is always better. So, the next ship, we have the Katinga. Now, the Katinga is where we first start getting access to a rear firing arc. So, this has got a forward 90 and a rear 90. Maneuver dial is identical. Again, the Klingons are almost unique, I think, in that every single one of their ships has almost the exact same maneuver dial. There's a couple of slight changes. Some of them have got 2 greens, some of them get white hard turn at 3s, but apart from that, they all get 1 to 4 straight, 3 come about. So a point for the Negvar and the Vocha, they're big capital ships that are meant to be equal to the Sovereign and the Prometheus, and they can throw it around like a tiny ship. Definitely an advantage. So the Katinga, 4142, this has got 2 weapon, 1 crew, so no tech slot, but it gets the rear firing arc. And the rear firing arc is enough to put it above the Negvar and the Vocha for me, because it just means that you're not restricted on what you can do. With these two, once you've gone past the enemy, you then have to do either a come about or spend a couple of turns doing hard turns. The Katinga can fire turn 1, scream past turn 2, be able to fire out of the rear on that same turn, and then zoom off into the distance. So it just means you can be engaged for longer, which is what the Klingons want. It does have downsides, as I said, no tech slots, only 1 crew slot, but it's definitely a solid ship. Going to number 7. Now, if you can see the back of the card, you know what this is? This is the Kelvin Timeline Warbird class, and just like the Kelvin Connie, it comes in the middle of the I would happily run the generic ship. Now, this is a very, very nice Klingon ship for a couple of reasons. A, it's got 6 green maneuvers. Nice. Crew weapon tech. Nice. It has battle stations on the action bar on a 4 attack dice ship. This is what we like. Now, the disadvantage is it has no evade. It is one of the very few ships that does not have evade on the action bar. So this thing is very much not meant for defense. This is a pure offensive ship. Battle stations, obviously, can be used for both, but there's no way just to go, I'm going pure evasive this turn with an evade token. You have to give it to them from something else. A point for the Warbird. It does have a secondary arc. However, the secondary arc is not a rear 90, it's a forward 45. Now that sounds weird, but there are several weapons which say they can only be fired from the secondary / rear firing arc. Now the secondary firing arc for this is forward. So if the enemy is in your, I believe it's called the bullseye arc in several other similar games, then you can still fire the weapon cards out of that secondary slot. There are several weapons which are secondary firing arc only, one of which is unique to the Warbird class, which is meant to be fired only in that forward 45 rather than the forward 90. So the fact that it's got a secondary arc is points, but it's a forward, which means again it's not going to be amazingly brilliant, but just the 4 attack dice with battle stations on the action bar and the 6 green maneuvers is enough to put this into the 7th slot. Our next slot is a 6th slot. We have the next Katinga. This Katinga is a bit higher. It gets crew weapon tech, so 1 of each slot. Again, apart from that, identical to the other Katingas. This sort of fits in between because it's got a little bit more customization over the other Katinga due to its slots and the battle stations. But the Katinga here with the rear 90, forward 90 plus the crew weapon tech is, I think, a better all-round ship than the Warbird. So, again, apart from that, everything that I said about the Katinga up there is the same about this one. The next ship, we have the generic Burrell. Yes, the very first time we've seen a Burrell. So, this is one of the most iconic Klingon ships. Now, the actual points should be 13 for a generic ship. It has been repointed. This is just the original card. Now, 13 points, 4 attack dice, combined 5 durability, only red maneuvers are come about. Absolutely fine. 2 weapon slots, 1 crew. So there's the limitation. No tech slot. But a rear 90. So again, can fire, screen past, fire behind. It's one of the most versatile sort of ships you've got, but again, only 2 weapons and 1 crew. Again, on a Burrell, generally, these are the brilliant thing for using as swarm ships, and generally you don't want to put 2 separate weapons on something that's going to be swarming. That's why the next one is the generic Burrell that comes with 2 crew, 1 weapon. Now this is much nicer because there's different crew. There are lots of generic Klingon crew that you can put on here that just give passive benefits or every round benefits, like First Officer or Klingon Tactical Officer or Helmsman or that sort of thing, that allow you to just do bonus maneuvers or have a free conversion or anything like that. And again, everything that I said about the 5 is the same about here, the 4. Now, there's 3 ships left. I'll let the Klingon players have a few seconds to have a think and tell me which order I've put the remaining 3 in. And then we'll tell you. So, the first one is the Klingon Bird of Prey. Now, there's a difference between the Klingon Bird of Prey and the Burrell. The Klingon Bird of Prey is the generic from Chang's Bird of Prey and Dukat's Bird of Prey. There is a difference in them. You may notice the maneuver dials. This is basically a Burrell that's slightly better at slow speeds, but slightly worse at the higher speeds. So red, 3 hard turns, but 2 green banks. Apart from that, exactly the same. Crew weapon tech, forward and rear firing arc of 90, 4 attack dice. Nothing wrong with that. It's a solid ship. And it was recosted, so it is now obviously a lot cheaper than that 20 points. So it's definitely, you know, a nice ship to have. Our second ship is the generic Cavort. Now the Cavort is basically a huge souped up Burrell. Exactly the same stat line as you may notice, apart from it's got 5 hull, not 3 hull. Still got the same 2 shields. Nothing changes. It's slightly slower at the higher speeds with the 3 hard turns. Now there are 2 technical versions of the Cavort. One ship base does not come with a rear firing arc. The rest of them all do, because that's only on one particular ship. The generic, they all have rear firing arcs. It's fine. The named Vaughn does not have a rear firing arc, but the generics should all have a rear firing arc. Said rear 90, forward 90. And again, this is just brilliant. It's hard. It's not going to be impossible to kill, but with the 5 points of hull, it should survive 1 hit. 3 hard turns come about. It's not as manoeuvrable as it could be, but it is a much bigger ship than, say, the Klingon, than the Burrell. And finally, wrong keys for moving. Everybody, fanfare please. The generic Burrell. Now, the generic Burrell comes in at number 1 for me, because it is just the absolute best generic Klingon ship. If you want a generic Klingon ship, you go for a Burrell. It's 13 points. You get a crew weapon tech slot in this particular one. As I say, you get a forward 90 and a rear 90. You've got enough stuff to make it dangerous. It's still cheap enough that you can put it down without putting any upgrades on it, and it's still amazingly effective, and you're not going to have to worry about it. Very manoeuvrable. The only red maneuver is, of course, the come about. So it's just absolutely brilliant. And then also, this is taking it from what I see other people using. So zooming out for a second, I do not see very many, if any, generic Vodchars, Negvars, even Katingas used very often. What I see an awful lot of used is generic Burrells. Now, obviously, there are some name Burrells which are very, very good, the Kuskari, for example. But obviously, also all the name Burrells generally are much, much older ships. They're all from the original version, where they're all like 22, 24 points. So a lot of them aren't used very much. People bring Burrells, they tend to bring generic Burrells or go for the modern named ones. Lurin's Bird of Prey, for example. So this is also a factor of what is played more, and Cavorts and Burrells get played many, many more times than Katingas and Vodchars and Negvars. Again, said, when you've got the choice between a Negvar and a Vodchar, yeah, the Negvar has got 1 point of additional hull, and it loses some green manoeuvres. So it's a toss-up which ones you want. You could probably swap around all 3 of them interchangeably, and I would not argue with your assessment, because in my mind they realistically are all about the same. Vodchar is ever so slightly more manoeuvrable with the 6 greens. The Negvar is ever so slightly more hard with the 6 points of hull, not 5. But with a 2-point tech upgrade for reinforced hull, it can be 7 or 8. So it's not as if you can't boost the Vodchar up to be more than the Negvar. Again, personal opinion, I would have the generic D7 up here top 5. Because the generic D7 is amazing ship, and I do like running it. Battle stations on the action bar, you give it a fixed dice weapon upgrade like a torpedo, and then you just scream it forwards, and you've got battle stations if you want it, you've got target lock if you want it, you've got both offensive options. Now obviously the named ships get used more often, so the Klothos, the Divisor, even the Groth. The Raptor is unfortunately, as I said, the last, but the Raptor doesn't get used. The Somroar is a nice ability, but it needs a lot of work to make it. And the Vez Battler it only really works, again, for obstacles and minefields. So you have to know that they're coming or bring them yourself. So that's down there because not because it's a bad ship, but because it's just never used. It's not something that people go, oh yes, this is a good ship. I think it's okay, but again, this is sort of grading it from, you know, least used and not effective to most used, most effective. Now, I would be happy to talk about and discuss this with anybody that wants to put a comment in about, I think you got this wrong, I think you got that wrong. If you think all Borels are equal irrespective of upgrade slots, I can see a point for that. I prefer crew weapon tech, and I think that's best because it's always best to have the most options. And obviously that is just, you know, a nice thing to have because you can have 13 points for the base ship and you can have a tech upgrade without having to put on a Dominion or retrofit or a crew upgrade that gives you a tech slot. So, you know, there's that, you know, everything. Now, most Klingon ships get a crew weapon tech. It's sort of a standard thing for them, which is nice because they're very versatile. And also very high attack values, whereas like the Federation, this era of ship is 2 dice. The NX era ship is a 2 dice. Their TOS era ship, the only one that isn't 2 is the Excelsior and the Constitution. The Miranda is a 2, the Obert's a 2. You know, even in Next Generation, you're running around with 3s for Excelsiors, 3 for Sabres, 4 for the Galaxy, and they're rocking up with Negvars and Voichars at 5s. But 4 is their sort of standard point, which is, you know, their standard is 4 compared to most other races' standard, which is 3. So they're definitely the more offensive of them, and that's portrayed in how manoeuvrable they are, as in everything gets to come about, which is absolutely terrifying. When you can have something like the Negvar, which could have 5 dice, maybe even 6, 7, 8 if you want to bump it up to the maximum, with a come about, that's scary. But as I said, I'm starting to ramble now, so I'll wrap it up. This is my list, 13 to 1. If you've got any comments about this, specifically you, and especially you Klingon players out there who have a particular favourite Klingon ship, feel free, drop a message in the comments. I'll read it. You know, if you've got a different ranking system, if you've got a different ranking, absolutely fine. If you've got a favourite ship that you want me to do a deeper dive into because you think I've undersold it or insulted its honour, then absolutely fine as well. Happy to do so. If you believe that justice for the Raptor class should be number 1, I will question your sanity, but I will happily discuss the topic. So, thank you very much for joining me. I will keep doing these interspersed with the rest of my videos. And this, I said, the next one will be the Romulans, and obviously I will go through and do the big factions, and then I'll do like a load of the little factions all together, since it's, you know, impossible to rank, you know, 3 ships against each other without them looking a bit silly. So, there we go. Thank you very much for joining me, and we will see you next time.